The wind howled across the Wyoming prairie like a lonesome wolf, carrying with it the bite of early winter. Rosalind Hayes pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood in the doorway of her small cabin, watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains. The sky bled crimson and gold, but she found no beauty in it anymore, not since Thomas had been gone. 6 months now. 6 months since they'd lowered her husband into the hard Wyoming earth, another soul claimed by this unforgiving land. The fever had taken him quick, leaving her with nothing but memories, mounting debts, and the child growing beneath her heart. She pressed a weathered hand to her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift and kick. "Easy now, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "We'll make it through somehow." The cabin creaked and groaned in the gathering dusk, its rough-hewn logs testament to Thomas's determination to build them a home out here in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from the nearest town, with only the occasional traveler passing by on the dusty trail that wound past their property toward Cheyenne. He'd been so proud of this place, all 40 acres of scrub grass and sagebrush, convinced they could make a go of it raising cattle and growing what they could in the stubborn soil. Now the dream felt as dead as he was. Rosalind stepped back inside, closing the door against the cold. The single room that served as kitchen, bedroom, and sitting area was lit by a lone kerosene lamp, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. She moved to the stove, stirring the thin soup that would be her supper water, a few withered vegetables from her struggling garden, and the last of the salt pork. The ledger lay open on the rough wooden table, its pages filled with numbers that grew more frightening each time she looked at them. The mortgage payment to the bank in Laramie was due in 2 weeks. $37.50 might as well have been $1,000 for all the chance she had of raising it. The general store in town had already extended her credit as far as Mr. Morrison was willing, and she'd sold everything of value except Thomas's rifle and her grandmother's Bible. She ladled soup into a cracked bowl and sat down heavily, her back aching from the day's labors. The vegetable garden needed constant attention to keep the rabbits and deer from destroying what little grew there. The chicken coop required daily repairs to keep out the foxes and coyotes. The well pump handle had started sticking again, and she'd spent an hour that morning working it loose with Thomas's tools. Everything was falling apart, just like her life. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away angrily. Crying wouldn't fill her belly or pay the mortgage. Her grandmother, Eulalie, had raised her stronger than that. Back in Missouri before she'd met Thomas at a church social and followed him west with stars in her eyes. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Grandmother Eulalie used to say, her French accent coloring the words. "But he also says we must help those in need. Ma petite, remember that always." Rosalind smiled bitterly at the memory. She was the one in need now, but there was no one to help. The nearest neighbors, the Corbetts, lived 8 miles east, and they had their own struggles with drought and poor soil. The wealthy ranchers who controlled most of the territory, men like Benjamin Caldwell who owned thousands of acres and countless head of cattle, they lived in a different world entirely. A world where women like her were invisible, unless they needed hired hands or someone to do washing. She forced herself to eat, knowing the baby needed nourishment, even if her appetite had fled. Outside, she heard the distant howl of wolves, probably tracking the elk herds moving down from the mountains. The sound sent a shiver through her, remembering the morning she'd found 2 of her chickens slaughtered, their coop torn open by some predator in the night. After supper, she read a few verses from the Bible by lamplight, seeking comfort in the familiar words. But even scripture couldn't quiet the fear that gnawed at her bones. Winter was coming. The baby was due in 2 months, and she was running out of time and options. She'd written to Thomas's brother in Kansas, swallowing her pride to ask for help, but received no reply. Either the letter had gone astray, or William wanted nothing to do with his brother's widow. Thomas had hinted at bad blood between them, some falling out over their father's estate, but she'd never learned the details. The lamp oil was running low, another expense she couldn't afford, so she blew out the flame and prepared for bed in the darkness. The narrow bed felt enormous without Thomas beside her. his solid warmth and quiet breathing. She curled on her side, one arm wrapped protectively around her belly, and listened to the wind rattling the windows. Tomorrow she would walk to the Corbett place and see if they needed any sewing done. Mrs. Corbett's arthritis made fine needlework difficult, and sometimes she paid Rosalind a few coins to mend clothes or stitch quilts. It wasn't much, but every penny helped. After that, she'd check the snares she'd set along the creek, hoping for a rabbit or two to stretch her meager food supplies. And after that, she didn't know. Each day was a battle just to survive until the next. She thought of the other widows she'd known, back in Missouri and here in Wyoming. Some remarried quickly, pragmatic unions born of necessity rather than love. Others moved in with family or found work as housekeepers or cooks in town. A few, the desperate ones, ended up in the saloons and brothels of Cheyenne or Laramie, trading their virtue for survival. Rosalind's hand tightened on her belly. "Not us," she whispered fiercely to her unborn child. "I'll find another way. I promise." But as sleep finally claimed her, she wondered how many promises she could keep when the world seemed determined to break them all. The vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above the little cabin, stars cold and distant as diamonds. And somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang its lonely song to the moon. The morning would bring new challenges, new fears, new small battles to fight. But tonight, Rosalind Hayes curled around the life growing within her and dreamed of better days, when Thomas's laughter filled their home and the future held more promise than pain. Even in dreams, though, the shadow of winter crept ever closer, and the wind whispered of hard times yet to come. The next afternoon brought unexpected clouds rolling in from the north, heavy and dark with the promise of rain. Rosalind had just returned from checking her snares, empty again, when she heard it, the sound of a horse, labored and uneven, coming down the trail. She froze on her porch, one hand instinctively moving to her belly while the other reached for the rifle propped beside the door. Thomas had taught her to shoot, insisted on it despite her protests. "Out here, Rose," he'd said. "You need to be ready for anything." The horse came into view, a magnificent black stallion that even in distress showed its fine breeding. But it was the rider that made her breath catch. He was slumped forward in the saddle, barely holding on, his expensive coat dark with what could only be blood. The horse stumbled to a stop near the creek that ran past her property. Barely 50 yards from the cabin, the rider swayed, tried to dismount, and collapsed heavily onto the bank. He didn't get up. Rosalind stood frozen, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed caution. This was how people died out here, trusting strangers, letting their guard down. The man could be an outlaw, a thief, a murderer fleeing justice. His fine clothes meant nothing, plenty of dangerous men dressed well. But then she heard it, a low groan of pain carried on the wind. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When someone needs help, ma petite, we must help. It's what separates us from the beasts." Still, she wasn't foolish. Rosalind took the rifle with her, holding it ready as she approached slowly, every sense alert for danger. The horse lifted its head to look at her, foam flecking its mouth, sides heaving with exhaustion. The man lay face down in the dirt, his breathing shallow and ragged. Blood had soaked through his coat and vest, spreading dark across the fine fabric. His hat had fallen off, revealing silver-streaked hair that spoke of middle age. Up close, she could see the quality of his clothes, the kind of garments that cost more than her cabin was worth. "Mister," she called out, staying back. "Can you hear me?" A grunt, then slowly, painfully, he turned his head. His face was pale beneath a neat beard, features drawn with pain but still showing what must have been a handsome countenance in health. His eyes, when they focused on her, were the clear blue of winter sky. "Water," he rasped. "Please." She should have been more careful, should have checked for weapons, for companions lurking nearby. But something in those eyes, pain, yes, but also a dignity that seemed at odds with criminal intent, made her decision. "Stay there," she said unnecessarily. as he clearly couldn't move. "I'll bring water." She hurried back to the cabin, filled a tin cup from the bucket by the door, and grabbed a clean cloth. When she returned, he hadn't moved, though his breathing seemed more labored. Kneeling beside him, still keeping the rifle within reach, she helped him turn onto his back. The movement drew a sharp gasp of pain, and she saw the source of the blood, a dark stain spreading from his left side. "Shot?" she asked, though the answer seemed obvious. He nodded weakly. 3 days ago. Thought I'd lost them." She helped him drink, supporting his head with one hand. He swallowed gratefully, some color returning to his cheeks. "Thank you," he managed. I'm sorry to trouble you, ma'am." "Who shot you?" she asked, glancing nervously at the trail. "Doesn't matter now." He coughed, specks of blood on his lips. "They've given up. I think, or figured I was dead already." Rosalind bit her lip, torn between compassion and self-preservation. He was clearly dying. The wound had festered, probably infected, and he'd lost too much blood. Even if she could get him to town, an impossibility given her condition and lack of a wagon, it would be too late. But she couldn't just leave him here to die alone by the creek. "Can you stand? My cabin's just there." He tried to smile, a ghost of what must have been a charming expression. "Doubt I could stand if my life depended on it, which, ironically, it does." "Then we'll manage another way." It took nearly an hour to get him to the cabin. She couldn't lift him, but between her support and his desperate determination, they managed a tortuous crawl across the yard. By the time they reached the porch, both were exhausted, and his face had gone gray with pain. She helped him onto her bed, the only bed, trying not to think about the blood staining her quilts. His fine clothes were ruined anyway, torn and filthy from his ordeal. "I need to look at the wound," she said. He nodded, fumbling with his coat buttons. She helped him remove the garment, then the vest and shirt beneath. The wound was worse than she'd feared. A ragged hole in his side, angry red lines spreading from it like poisoned veins. "It's bad," she said quietly. "I know." His voice was calm, accepting. "Knew it yesterday when the fever started." She cleaned the wound as best she could with water and the last of her whiskey, though she knew it was futile. He bore it stoically, only the tightening of his jaw showing his pain. "What's your name?" she asked, needing to fill the silence as she worked. "Benjamin," he said. "Benjamin Caldwell." The cloth slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Benjamin Caldwell. She'd heard that name spoken in town with the kind of reverence and fear reserved for kings and natural disasters. The man who owned more land than some eastern states, whose rocking sea ranch employed hundreds of men, whose influence reached from here to Denver and beyond. "The Benjamin Caldwell?" she whispered. His lips quirked. "Unless there's another fool by that name bleeding on your bed." "Yes. But what are you doing out here? Alone?" "Trying to die in peace, apparently." He closed his eyes. "I was coming back from Denver. Business with the railroad. My men were waiting in Laramie, but I wanted to ride alone for a while." "Foolish. Who would dare shoot you? Someone who wanted what I have, I suppose. There's always someone." He opened his eyes, studying her face. "And you? I don't even know the name of my guardian angel. Rosalind Hayes," she said. "And I'm no angel, just a kind woman who helped a stranger." He finished. "That's angel enough for me." She busied herself making him as comfortable as possible, bringing fresh water, finding an old sheet to tear into bandages. All the while, her mind raced. Benjamin Caldwell, dying in her cabin. It seemed impossible, like something from the dime novels sold at Morrison's store. "Mrs. Hayes," he said suddenly. Is your husband about?" She stiffened. "He died 6 months past." "I'm sorry." Genuine sympathy colored his voice. "This land is hard on good people." "That it is." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's your child you're carrying." She nodded, unconsciously protective. "Due in 2 months. And you're out here alone." It wasn't a question. He looked around the simple cabin, taking in the patched walls, the meager furnishings, the obvious signs of poverty. Forgive my presumption, but how are you managing? Pride made her want to lie, but what was the point? I'm not, she admitted. Bank's going to take the land in 2 weeks. After that, she shrugged. He studied her with those keen blue eyes. Even dying, there was sharp intelligence there, the mind that had built an empire still working behind the pain. You could have left me by the creek, he said softly. Taken my horse, my belongings. No one would have known. That's not who I am. No, he agreed. It's not. As the afternoon wore on, his condition worsened. The fever rose, and he drifted in and out of consciousness. Rosalind stayed beside him, cooling his face with damp cloths, giving him sips of water when he could manage them. She found herself talking to fill the silence, telling him about Thomas, about their dreams for the land, about the baby she carried. When he was lucid, he shared fragments of his own story. A wife dead these 20 years. No children, an empire built on cattle and determination, but no one to leave it to except distant relatives who circled like vultures. As darkness fell, she lit the lamp, using precious oil she couldn't spare, but it seemed wrong to let him die in darkness. Rosalind, he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been in hours. In my coat pocket, papers. She found them, a leather portfolio stuffed with documents, legal papers, deeds, bank drafts. He struggled to sit up, and she helped him. I need to write something. Do you have pen and ink? She fetched Thomas's writing materials, rarely used since his death. With shaking hands, he began to write, his normally elegant script wavering across the page. What are you doing? She asked. Setting things right, he muttered, continuing to write. For once in my life, setting things right. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and handed it to her along with the portfolio. Keep these safe. Whatever happens, keep these safe. Mr. Caldwell. Benjamin, he corrected gently. I think we're past formalities. Benjamin, I don't understand. You will. He lay back, exhausted by the effort. Promise me. Keep them safe. I promise, she said, though she had no idea what she was promising. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his pain-etched features. Thank you, Rosalind Hayes, for the water, for the kindness, for reminding an old fool that there's still good in this world. As the night deepened, his breathing grew more labored. Rosalind sat beside him, holding his hand, offering what comfort she could to this stranger who had somehow, in a few short hours, become not a stranger at all. The lamp had burned low when Benjamin Caldwell stirred one final time. His eyes, which had been closed for the past hour, opened with surprising clarity. Rosalind, who had dozed fitfully in the chair beside the bed, immediately leaned forward. Water? She asked softly. He shook his head slightly. No, just listen. His voice was barely a whisper now, each word an effort. The papers I gave you, they're important, more important than you know. Benjamin, save your strength. No strength left to save. A ghost of his earlier smile touched his lips. Those papers, they're deeds, land deeds, all of them. Every ranch, every acre I own. Rosalind's breath caught. I don't understand. The letter I wrote, it's my will, witnessed by you, legal enough for any court in Wyoming. He paused, gathering what remained of his strength. I'm leaving it all to you. What? The word came out as barely more than a gasp. No, you can't. You don't even know me. I know enough. His eyes held hers, still keen despite the approaching darkness. You took in a dying stranger, gave him water, shelter, dignity. You're alone, pregnant, about to lose your home, and still you helped. That doesn't mean, Benjamin, you have family, surely, vultures, he said flatly. My sister Evelyn, her son Richard. They've been circling for years, waiting. They'll contest the will, of course. But it's legal. I made sure. Rosalind's hands trembled as she clutched the portfolio. It's too much. I can't. You can. His hand found hers, the grip weak but insistent. That child you carry, they'll have a future now. A real future. The rocking sea, the double diamond, the Sunset Ranch. Thousands of acres, tens of thousands of cattle. It's all yours. People won't accept this. A woman. Alone. My foreman, Jake Morrison. He's a good man, loyal to the brand, not the blood. He'll help you. The letter explains everything. He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. There's also bank accounts. In Cheyenne, Denver. Account numbers are in the portfolio. Rosalind's mind reeled. This morning she had been checking empty snares, counting her last pennies. Now this man was trying to give her an empire. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? His eyes drifted closed, but he answered. 20 years ago, my Margaret died. Fever, like your husband. I was away, building my fortune. Wasn't there when she needed me. His breathing hitched. She was kind, like you. Would have helped any soul in need. I think she would approve. The wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Benjamin's breathing grew shallower, longer pauses between each breath. The safe, he said suddenly, eyes flying open. In my study at the rocking sea, behind the painting of the mountains. Combination is Margaret's birthday, March 15th, 1831, 3/15/31. Remember. 3/15/31, Rosalind repeated numbly. Good. He settled back, seeming more at peace. There's gold there, currency, enough to see you through until the accounts are settled. Benjamin, one more thing. His voice was fading now, each word a struggle. Evelyn will come. She'll try to intimidate you, buy you off. Maybe worse. Don't let her. That empire was built on sweat and sacrifice, but also on taking care of people. The ranch hands, their families. They depend on the Caldwell holdings. Evelyn would bleed them dry. I'm not strong enough for this, Rosalind said, tears streaming down her face. I'm just a farmer's widow. You're the woman who gave a dying man water, he said simply. That's strength enough. His hand squeezed hers one last time, then loosened. His eyes focused on something beyond her, beyond the cabin walls. Margaret, he whispered. I see you, my dear. And then, as quietly as a candle being extinguished, Benjamin Caldwell was gone. Rosalind sat in the sudden silence, still holding his cooling hand. The magnitude of what had just happened crashed over her like a Wyoming thunderstorm. The richest man in the territory had died in her bed, leaving her everything he owned. It was impossible, unbelievable, terrifying. She looked down at the portfolio in her lap, then at the letter he had written. With shaking hands, she unfolded it and read by the dying lamplight. I, Benjamin James Caldwell, being of sound mind though failing body, do hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions, land, livestock, holdings, and accounts, to Mrs. Rosalind Hayes of Wyoming Territory, in gratitude for her Christian charity and in hopes that she will be a better steward of these assets than my blood relations. Witnessed this day by Mrs. Hayes herself, whose signature appears below. There was a space for her signature, and his own sprawling signature below that, shaky but unmistakable. She set the letter aside and opened the portfolio. Deed after deed, each one properly notarized and sealed. The Rocking Sea Ranch, 20,000 acres. The Double Diamond, 15,000. The Sunset, the Bar 7, the Triple Creek. The list went on. Bank documents showing accounts in multiple cities. Letters of credit, bonds, a fortune beyond her comprehension. Dawn was breaking, pale light creeping through the windows. Rosalind knew she should move, should do something, but she sat frozen, overwhelmed by the turn her life had taken. Yesterday she had been nobody. Nothing. A pregnant widow facing eviction. Today she was potentially the wealthiest woman in Wyoming Territory. If she could keep it. Benjamin's warning echoed in her mind. Evelyn would come. Others too, probably. Lawyers, relatives, men who would think a lone woman had no right to such wealth. They would challenge the will, challenge her, perhaps do worse than challenge. She looked at Benjamin's still form, peaceful now in death. He had trusted her with an empire built over decades, not because she had earned it, but because she had shown simple human kindness. Carefully, she closed his eyes and pulled the sheet over his face. Then she stood, her back aching from the night spent in the chair, and walked to the window. His horse still stood by the creek, head hanging with exhaustion. Her first act as an heiress, she thought with dark humor, would be to tend to a horse. But no, her first act would be to honor Benjamin Caldwell properly. He deserved better than a pauper's burial in her small plot beside Thomas. She dressed carefully, pinning her hair back severely, trying to look like someone who could inherit a fortune without raising eyebrows. An impossible task, but she had to try. She tucked the portfolio and letter into her trunk, beneath Thomas's Sunday suit, then loaded his rifle. The ride to town would be difficult on Benjamin's horse. She had never ridden such a fine animal, and her condition made everything awkward. But she had no choice. She needed to report the death, send telegrams, begin the process that would either make her wealthy beyond dreams or destroy her entirely. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the bedside one last time. "I'll try," she whispered to the covered form. "I don't know if I'm strong enough, but I'll try. For my child. For your Margaret. For all the people depending on those ranches." She touched her belly, feeling the baby move. "You hear that, little one? Our lives just changed. God help us both." The morning sun was fully up when she led the black stallion outside. She managed to mount with the help of the porch rail, settling awkwardly into the expensive saddle. The horse, despite its exhaustion, responded to her tentative touch on the reins. As she turned toward town, Rosalind Hayes, pregnant widow, failed farmer, unlikely heiress, took a deep breath and rode toward a future she could never have imagined. Behind her, the small cabin stood silent, keeping its secrets for now. But soon enough, the world would know what had transpired there. The black stallion's hoofbeats echoed on the hard-packed trail, carrying her toward Laramie and the storm that was sure to follow. In her mind, she repeated the safe combination like a prayer. 3, 15, 31. Numbers that might save her, or might mark the beginning of a battle she wasn't sure she could win. But she would try. She had given her word to a dying man, and Rosalind Hayes kept her promises, even when they seemed impossible. The funeral had been simple but dignified. Held at the small cemetery on the outskirts of Laramie, Jake Morrison, the rocking sea foreman Benjamin had mentioned, had arrived with a dozen ranch hands to pay their respects. To Rosalind's surprise, the grizzled cowboy had tipped his hat to her and said quietly, "Mr. Caldwell sent word about you, ma'am. Said if anything happened, we were to help you, the boys and I. We'll honor that." That had been 3 days ago. Now, sitting on the porch of her cabin in the afternoon sun, Rosalind heard them coming long before she saw them. The rumble of expensive carriages on the rough trail, the jingle of fine harness. She stood slowly, one hand on her back, the other reaching for the rifle beside the door. Jake Morrison had wanted to leave men to guard her, but she'd refused, not ready to accept that level of help yet. Now she wondered if that had been foolish pride. The procession that appeared was impressive in its ostentation. 2 gleaming black carriages, a wagon loaded with trunks, and 6 outriders, all wearing matching dark coats despite the Wyoming heat. It looked more like a royal progression than visitors to a frontier cabin. The first carriage rolled to a stop, and a footman, out here, jumped down to open the door. The woman who emerged was everything Rosalind was not. Tall, elegant, dressed in black silk that probably cost more than the cabin. Steel gray hair swept up in an elaborate style. Sharp features that might have been handsome in youth, but had hardened into something predatory. Evelyn Caldwell. It could be no one else. Behind her came a younger man, perhaps 30, with the soft look of someone who'd never done a day's real work. His clothes were expensive, but somehow ill-fitting, as if no amount of tailoring could make him look distinguished. This would be the son. Richard, finally. A thin man in a severe black suit emerged, carrying a leather case. The lawyer, obviously. He had the look of a ferret, sharp, quick, hunting for weakness. Evelyn approached the porch with the confidence of someone who owned everything she surveyed. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Rosalind with cold gray eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, I presume?" Her voice was cultured, Eastern, dripping with disdain. "I'm Evelyn Caldwell Whitmore, Benjamin's sister." "I know who you are," Rosalind said quietly, not moving from her position by the door. "Then you know why I'm here." Evelyn's gaze swept over the humble cabin, the patched walls, the sagging chicken coop. Her lips curved in what might have been a smile on a warmer face. "This is where my brother died. How quaint." "He died with dignity," Rosalind said, "and kindness. Spare me the platitudes." Evelyn waved a gloved hand dismissively. "We've come for the documents my brother was carrying. Family papers that belong to the estate. Everything your brother carried now belongs to me," Rosalind said evenly. "According to his will?" Richard Whitmore laughed, an unpleasant sound. "His will? You mean that scrap of paper you probably forced him to sign while he was delirious?" The lawyer stepped forward. "I am Clarence Pemberton, attorney for the Caldwell estate. I must inform you, Mrs. Hayes, that any documents signed under duress or while my client was of unsound mind are legally invalid." "He was of sound mind," Rosalind said, "clear until the end." The word of a desperate widow facing eviction? Evelyn's voice was silk over steel. "Against the testimony of his loving family? I think not." "You hadn't seen him in 2 years," Rosalind said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "He told me." Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes. "What my brother told you in his delirium is irrelevant. The fact remains that the Caldwell holdings belong to the Caldwell family, not to some opportunistic farm wife who happened to be convenient when he was dying." "Mother," Richard said, his voice petulant, "just have Pemberton handle it. It's too hot to stand here arguing with her." Evelyn ignored him, keeping her cold gaze on Rosalind. "I'm prepared to be generous, Mrs. Hayes, more generous than you deserve. $500 for the return of all documents and your signature on a statement that my brother was not in his right mind when he died. $500. 6 months ago. It would have seemed like a fortune. Now, knowing what lay in that portfolio hidden in her trunk, it was an insult." "No," Rosalind said simply. "I beg your pardon. I said no. Your brother left his estate to me. I have his will, properly witnessed. I intend to honor his wishes." Evelyn's face darkened. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I have connections in Denver, in Washington, judges who owe me favors, senators who dine at my table, and yet your brother left everything to me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard stepped forward, his soft face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to my mother that way? You're nothing, nobody. A pregnant cow who should be grateful for whatever scraps we throw you." "Richard," Evelyn's voice was sharp, "control yourself." But the damage was done. Rosalind felt her spine stiffen, her grandmother's pride flowing through her. "Get off my land," she said quietly. Pemberton cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Hayes, according to county records, this land belongs to the Laramie Bank and Trust. You're behind on payments, I believe, due for eviction in," he consulted a paper, "11 days. That situation has changed." Rosalind said, "Has it?" Evelyn smiled coldly. "And how will you pay? With the money my brother supposedly left you? Money you can't access without proper legal documentation? Documentation that will be tied up in court for years?" This was the trap, Rosalind realized. Even if Benjamin's will held up legally, the court battles could take forever. Meanwhile, she would lose her home, have her baby in poverty, possibly starve before seeing a penny of the inheritance. "I have friends in the banking business," Evelyn continued. One word from me, and your eviction could be moved up. Today, even, imagine that. Giving birth on the side of the road like an animal. You're threatening a pregnant woman. Rosalind couldn't hide her disgust. I'm offering a pregnant woman a chance to be practical, Evelyn corrected. $500. A ticket back east. A fresh start somewhere civilized. All for just admitting the truth, that my brother was out of his head when he died. The truth, Rosalind said slowly, is that your brother was the most lucid dying man I've ever seen. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly why he wasn't leaving anything to you. Evelyn's composure finally cracked. You little witch! You seduced him somehow. Played on his sympathies with your sad story and your swollen belly. I gave him water, Rosalind said. That's all. Water and a place to die with dignity, if that's seduction in your world. Then I pity you. Pity? Richard laughed harshly. You pity us. You'll be begging for pity when we're through with you. Enough. Evelyn had regained her control. Pemberton, what are our options? The lawyer adjusted his spectacles. We file immediately to contest the will. Claim undue influence, unsound mind. Request a judge to freeze all assets until the matter is resolved. Given Mrs. Hayes's circumstances, no reputable lawyer will take her case without significant retainer, which she can't access, Evelyn said with satisfaction. Perfect. She turned back to Rosalind. This is your last chance. Mrs. Hayes, take the money, sign the papers, walk away, because if you force me to destroy you legally, I will, and I'll enjoy every moment of it. Rosalind stood silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of the baby, the ache in her back, the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. David and Goliath. She thought, except David had a sling and stones. What did she have? Faith, her grandmother would have said. Faith and righteousness. My answer is no, she said finally. Now get off my land, while it's still mine. Evelyn's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this. I'll see you in the gutter where you belong. You and your bastard child both. My child is not a bastard, Rosalind said coldly. And you'll see me in court. For a moment, violence crackled in the air. Richard stepped forward as if to climb the porch steps, but Rosalind's hand moved to the rifle, and he stopped. Come, Evelyn said finally. We have work to do. They swept back to their carriages with offended dignity. As the footman helped Evelyn into the carriage, she turned back one last time. You could have been rich, Mrs. Hayes. Now you'll have nothing. I already have more than you, Rosalind called back. I have a clear conscience. The procession departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Rosalind alone on her porch. Only when they were out of sight did she allow herself to sag against the doorframe, shaking with delayed reaction. The battle was joined. David versus Goliath indeed. But David had won that fight, she reminded herself. Of course, David hadn't been 7 months pregnant at the time. She went inside and retrieved the portfolio from its hiding place, spreading the documents on her table. Somewhere in these papers was her salvation or her doom. She just had to figure out which and fast. 11 days until eviction, unless Evelyn made good on her threat to expedite it. Rosalind touched her belly, feeling the baby kick. Hold on, little one, she whispered. The fight's just beginning. The acrid smell of smoke woke her before dawn. Rosalind bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding as the familiar scent filled her nostrils. Fire, every frontier dweller's nightmare. She rushed to the window, her pregnant belly making her clumsy, and gasped at what she saw. The chicken coop was ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. Her few remaining chickens were squawking in terror. Trapped inside, without thinking, she grabbed a blanket and the water bucket, rushing outside in her nightgown. The heat hit her like a physical blow as she approached the coop. She managed to kick open the small door, and 3 chickens burst out, feathers singed but alive. The others. She tried not to think about the others. Using the blanket to beat at the flames, she fought desperately to save what she could. But the structure was old, the wood dry as tinder. Within minutes, it was clear the battle was lost. She backed away, coughing from the smoke, and that's when she saw them. Fresh wagon tracks in the dirt, leading away from her property. Someone had been here. Someone had done this deliberately. The message was clear. Evelyn Caldwell Whitmore didn't make idle threats. As the sun rose over the smoking ruins of her chicken coop, Rosalind stood in her dirt yard, nightgown sooty and singed, and felt the full weight of what she was facing. This was just the beginning. The harassment continued over the next 3 days. Her well rope was cut, leaving the bucket at the bottom. Someone had scattered her vegetable garden with salt, ensuring nothing would grow. The fence around her small corral was damaged, though thankfully Thomas's old milk cow hadn't wandered off. But it was the whispers in town that hurt almost as much as the physical damage. When she walked to Morrison's general store, conversations stopped. Women she'd known for 2 years suddenly had pressing business elsewhere, even kind Mr. Morrison seemed nervous as he filled her meager order. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, glancing around his empty store. "I heard about your situation with the Caldwell estate." "News travels fast," she said wearily. "Ma'am, I've got to be honest with you. Mrs. Whitmore's been in town. She's made it clear that anyone who helps you might find themselves having difficulties. Business difficulties. If you understand me." Rosalind's heart sank. "She's threatening you. Not in so many words, but the Caldwell ranch buys a lot of supplies, and her friends buy even more." He looked genuinely distressed. "I've got a family to feed. Mrs. Hayes, I can't afford to lose that business." "I understand," she said quietly. "I won't put you in that position. Mr. Morrison." He wrapped her small purchases, salt pork, flour, beans, and pushed the package across the counter. When she reached for her purse, he shook his head. "No charge," he said gruffly. "And Mrs. Hayes, you might want to consider her offer. Sometimes it's better to bend than break." Walking home with her packages, Rosalind felt the eyes watching her from windows and doorways. The whole town knew. The pregnant widow who thought she could stand against the Caldwell family. The fool who didn't know when to quit. That night, she made a decision. If she was going to fight, she needed help, and there was only one place to get it. The next morning, she penned a careful telegram to the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne. "Urgent stop attempts to intimidate witness to legal will stop arson and threats. Stop request immediate assistance. Stop Mrs. Rosalind Hayes, Laramie Stop." The telegraph operator, young Pete Daniels, read it with wide eyes. "In Mrs. Hayes, are you sure you want to send this?" "Every word. Pete. It's just accusing the Whitmores of arson. That's serious business. So is burning down a pregnant woman's chicken coop," she said firmly. "Send it, please." He did, though his hands shook as he worked the key. Rosalind paid the fee, using precious coins she could ill afford to spare, and left, knowing that by nightfall, Evelyn would know about the telegram. Pete might sympathize with her, but he also had to live in this town. She was proven right that very evening. She had just finished her meager supper when hoofbeats thundered into her yard. Through the window, she saw 6 riders, all armed, all wearing the kind of clothes that marked them as hired guns rather than cowboys. Their leader, a man with cold dark eyes and a scar across his cheek, dismounted and approached her door. He didn't knock, just called out in a voice like gravel, "Mrs. Hayes, we need to have a conversation." Rosalind took Thomas's rifle from beside the door, checked the load, and opened the door a crack. "State your business." The scarred man smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Garrett. Mrs. Whitmore wanted me to deliver a message." "I'm listening." "She heard you sent a telegram today to the federal marshals." "That wasn't neighborly." "Mrs. Hayes, not neighborly at all. Neither is burning down my property. Now, see, that's what we call slander, making accusations without proof." He shifted, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Dangerous thing, slander, can get a person in all kinds of trouble. Is that a threat, Mr. Garrett? Just friendly advice. His smile widened. Telegrams can go missing. You know, federal marshals are busy men. Might not get around to investigating some wild claims from a hysterical pregnant woman for weeks, months, even. I see. Smart woman. Now, Mrs. Whitmore, being a Christian lady, wants to give you another chance. That offer of $500? It goes down to $300 tomorrow. Day after that, $100. Day after that. He shrugged. Well, after that, offers might be off the table entirely. Rosalind's finger tightened on the trigger. Get off my land. Now. No need for unpleasantness. But he backed toward his horse. You think hard about what's best for you and that baby. Mrs. Hayes, real hard. They rode off in a cloud of dust and masculine laughter, leaving Rosalind shaking with anger and fear. She closed the door, barred it, and sank into a chair. The baby kicked, reminding her of what was at stake. It wasn't just her life anymore. Could she really risk her child's future for a fortune she might never see? But then she remembered Benjamin's eyes, the trust he'd placed in her. Evelyn would bleed them dry. He'd said about the ranch hands and their families. How many people depended on the Caldwell ranches for their livelihood? How many families would suffer if Evelyn gained control? It wasn't just about the money, she realized. It was about justice, about honoring a dying man's wishes, about standing up to bullies who thought their wealth and connections put them above common decency. She spent that night awake, rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally came, she was exhausted but resolute. She would not give in to terrorism. She would not betray Benjamin's trust, but she would be smarter about it. That day, she wrote letters to the newspaper in Cheyenne, detailing the harassment, to the territorial governor, requesting protection for a witness to a legal document, to 3 different law firms in Denver, inquiring about representation. She gave the letters to 3 different travelers passing through, not trusting the local mail. One of them, surely, would reach its destination. She also visited Jake Morrison at the Rocking Sea. The foreman received her in the ranch office, his weathered face grave. I heard about your troubles, ma'am, he said. The boys are mighty upset about it. Mr. Caldwell was a good man. He wouldn't have wanted this. Can you help me, Mr. Morrison? He sighed heavily. I want to, ma'am. But Mrs. Whitmore's already sent word. Any Rocking Sea hand who helps you will be fired and blacklisted. These men have families. I understand, Rosalind said, though her heart sank. I wouldn't ask them to risk their livelihoods. But, Jake continued, lowering his voice, what happens off Rocking Sea property? On a man's own time, well, that's different. And some of the boys, they remember how Mr. Caldwell helped them when they were down. They've got long memories. It was a slim hope, but hope nonetheless. Rosalind thanked him and left, noting how several cowboys tipped their hats to her as she passed. Not all of Evelyn's money could buy loyalty. It seemed that night passed quietly, but Rosalind didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching, waiting, planning. The eviction notice was days away. Evelyn's deadline was ticking down. The federal marshals might or might not come, but Rosalind Hayes had survived her husband's death, months of loneliness and hardship. And now, this campaign of terror. She would survive whatever came next. For herself, for her baby, for Benjamin Caldwell's trust, and for the principle that in America, even in the wild frontier of Wyoming, justice should mean more than money and might. The battle was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. The Laramie courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every bench was filled, people standing along the walls. More gathered outside, peering through windows. The news had spread like wildfire. The pregnant widow versus the Caldwell Empire. A David and Goliath story that had captured the imagination of the territory. Judge Samuel Thornton, a thin man with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles, rapped his gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order in my courtroom. Rosalind sat at the defendant's table, feeling very small and very alone. She had no lawyer. None would take her case without a substantial retainer she couldn't access. Across from her, Evelyn Caldwell Whitmore sat surrounded by 3 attorneys, including the ferret-like Pemberton. This hearing, Judge Thornton announced, is to determine the validity of the last will and testament of Benjamin James Caldwell. Mrs. Whitmore, as next of kin, contests this will. Mrs. Hayes maintains its validity. Mr. Pemberton, you may begin. Pemberton rose, adjusting his coat with theatrical precision. Your Honor, this case is simple. A wealthy man, dying and delirious, taken advantage of by an opportunistic woman who saw a chance to escape her dire circumstances. Objection, Rosalind said, standing awkwardly. That's not Mrs. Hayes. The judge said not unkindly. You'll have your turn. Please be seated. Pemberton continued, painting a picture of Benjamin as confused, fevered, not knowing what he was signing. He produced affidavits from 3 doctors, none of whom had seen Benjamin. Rosalind noted testifying that a man with an infected gunshot wound would be delirious. Furthermore, Pemberton said, we question whether Mr. Caldwell's signature on this supposed will is genuine. The handwriting is shaky, unclear. Because he was dying, Rosalind couldn't help but interject. Judge Thornton frowned. Mrs. Hayes, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. My apologies, Your Honor, she said, sinking back into her chair. Pemberton smiled coldly and continued his assassination of her character. She was desperate, facing eviction, pregnant and alone. What wouldn't such a woman do? The will was obviously coerced, possibly forged. The very idea that Benjamin Caldwell would leave his empire to a stranger was ludicrous. When he finally sat down, Rosalind felt as if she'd been physically beaten. Every eye in the courtroom seemed to judge her, to find her wanting. Mrs. Hayes, Judge Thornton said. Do you wish to speak in your defense? She stood slowly, her hand on her belly for support. The baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing her distress. Your Honor, she began, her voice quiet but clear. I'm not educated in law like Mr. Pemberton. I can't make fancy speeches or produce hired doctors. All I have is the truth. She told the story simply, the stranger collapsing by her creek, her decision to help despite her fears, the long night of tending him. He was dying, yes, but his mind was clear. He told me about his ranches, about his sister, about his late wife, Margaret. He wrote that will with his own hand, slowly but deliberately. He had me read it back to him twice to make sure it said what he wanted. A convenient story, Evelyn called out. With no witnesses, Mrs. Whitmore, the judge warned. But there were witnesses, a new voice said from the back of the room. Everyone turned. 2 men were making their way forward, one older with a gray beard, one younger with a dark skin that marked him as Mexican or Indian. And you are? Judge Thornton asked. Josiah Mills, the older man said. This here's Miguel Santos. We're traders. Your Honor, we were passing by Mrs. Hayes' place that morning, looking to water our horses at her creek. Rosalind's heart leaped. She remembered now. She'd seen riders in the distance, but had been too focused on Benjamin to pay attention. Continue, the judge said. We saw the whole thing, Josiah said. The man on the ground, Mrs. Hayes helping him to her cabin. We were concerned, thought maybe there'd been an attack, so we stayed nearby, watching. Later, Miguel added, his English accented but clear. We approached the cabin. The door was open for air. We saw the man riding, Mrs. Hayes beside him. He was weak, but seemed to know what he was doing. You saw him sign the will? Judge Thornton asked sharply. Clear as day, Josiah confirmed. Even heard him tell her to keep the papers safe. We didn't want to intrude on a dying man, so we left, but we saw enough. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Evelyn's face had gone pale, while Pemberton huddled with his colleagues in furious conference. Why didn't you come forward sooner? The judge asked. We were down in Mexico. Miguel explained. Only heard about the fuss when we came back through last week. Figured we should speak up. This is convenient beyond belief, Pemberton protested. These men could be anyone. Paid to lie. Are you calling us liars? Josiah's voice was dangerously quiet. In the frontier, that was fighting words. Gentlemen, Judge Thornton intervened. Mr. Mills, Mr. Santos, are you willing to swear under oath to what you've told us? On my mother's grave. Josiah said firmly. On the Bible, Miguel added. The judge had them sworn in and repeat their testimony. They were unshakable in their details. The time of day, what Benjamin was wearing, how Rosalind had helped him, the careful way he'd written despite obvious pain. Furthermore, Josiah added, we'd be happy to provide a sample of our handwriting to prove we didn't write that will ourselves, and anyone who knows the territory knows we've been trading these routes for 15 years. Our word is good from here to Santa Fe. Pemberton tried to poke holes in their story, but the traders were solid witnesses. They had no connection to either party, no reason to lie, and their reputation was indeed well known. Your Honor, Rosalind said quietly. May I add something? Go ahead, Mrs. Hayes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather journal. Benjamin asked me to get this from his coat pocket. It's his personal diary. The last entry is dated the day before he died. She opened it and read, Riding alone from Denver. Feel followed. If something happens to me, I want it known that my affairs are in order. The empire I built should go to someone who understands that wealth is a responsibility, not a privilege. E has shown she understands only the latter. That proves nothing, Evelyn burst out. He could have meant anyone by E. Then perhaps, Rosalind said, you'd like to explain the next line? She continued reading. My sister grows more grasping with each year. I fear what would become of the ranch hands and their families under her management. Evelyn's face flushed red. That's a forgery. Your Honor, Josiah Mills spoke up again. If I might... I've done business with Mr. Caldwell for years. I'd recognize his handwriting anywhere. May I? The judge nodded. Josiah examined the journal, comparing it to other documents bearing Benjamin's signature. That's his writing, sure enough. He pronounced. Seen it on dozens of bills of sale? Judge Thornton called for a recess. When court reconvened an hour later, his expression was grave. This court has heard compelling testimony, he began. While the circumstances are certainly unusual, the evidence supports the validity of Mr. Caldwell's will. 2 credible witnesses saw him write and sign it while of apparent sound mind. His own journal supports his intention to disinherit his sister. Your Honor, Pemberton began. However, the judge continued, given the substantial nature of the estate, I am ordering a 30-day period for any additional challenges to be filed. The will is provisionally validated, but the estate remains frozen until that period expires. What does that mean? Rosalind asked. It means, the judge explained, that you are recognized as the likely heir, but cannot access any funds for 30 days. If no substantial new evidence emerges, the estate will be released to you. 30 days. Rosalind's heart sank. The bank would foreclose long before then. Furthermore, Judge Thornton added, looking directly at Evelyn, any harassment or intimidation of Mrs. Hayes during this period will be met with the full force of the law. Is that clear? Crystal, Evelyn said through gritted teeth. As the courtroom began to empty, Josiah Mills approached Rosalind. Ma'am, that was a brave thing you did, standing up to them. Thank you, she said, tears of relief threatening. I can't say how grateful I am that you came forward. Benjamin Caldwell was a good man, Miguel added. He helped my family once, years ago. This was the right thing. They left, and Rosalind found herself face to face with Evelyn in the courthouse corridor. This isn't over, the older woman hissed. 30 days is a long time. A lot can happen to a woman alone. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Evelyn swept away, leaving Rosalind standing alone. Victory hollow in the face of continued uncertainty. She had won the battle, but the war was far from over, and she still had no idea how she would survive the next 30 days. The gavel fell with finality that seemed to echo through the packed courtroom. Judge Thornton's voice rang clear and decisive in the hushed atmosphere. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, including the testimony of credible witnesses and examination of the deceased's personal effects, this court finds the last will and testament of Benjamin James Caldwell to be valid and legally binding. Rosalind felt her knees weaken with relief, one hand gripping the table for support, while the other pressed against her belly where the baby kicked vigorously, as if celebrating the news. Mrs. Rosalind Hayes is hereby recognized as the sole and rightful heir to the Caldwell estate, including all properties, livestock, and financial holdings detailed in the will. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered ranch hands from the rocking sea who had defied threats to attend, townspeople who had quietly sympathized with the young widow. Others muttered darkly. Evelyn's supporters who saw their hopes of favor and profit evaporating. Above it all rose Evelyn's voice, shrill with rage. "This is a travesty, a mockery of justice. That woman is nothing but a common Mrs. Whitmore." Judge Thornton's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "You will control yourself in my courtroom or be removed. The decision of this court is final." Evelyn stood abruptly, her face contorted with fury. For a moment, Rosalind thought the older woman might actually strike her. Then Evelyn seemed to collect herself, drawing her dignity around her like armor. "We shall see about that," she said coldly. "The Territorial Supreme Court will hear of this. Federal judges in Washington will know how Wyoming justice operates." She turned to Pemberton. "File the appeals. All of them. The court's decision stands pending any appeal." Judge Thornton stated firmly. "And Mrs. Whitmore, let me be perfectly clear. Any further harassment, intimidation, or violence directed at Mrs. Hayes will result in your immediate arrest. The federal marshal's office has been notified of the situation." As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened and two men in the distinctive dark suits and badges of federal marshals entered. The crowd parted before them. Marshal Tom Briggs, the older of the two, announced, "We received Mrs. Hayes' telegram. Seems we arrived just in time for the verdict." Evelyn's lawyer Pemberton cleared his throat. "Marshals, surely you don't believe my client has engaged in any—" "We've got witnesses say otherwise." Marshal Briggs interrupted. "Burned chicken coop, cut well rope, hired guns making threats. You want to deny all that under federal oath?" "Counselor." Pemberton fell silent. Judge Thornton addressed Rosalind. "Mrs. Hayes, you are free to take possession of your inheritance immediately. I suggest you contact the banks in question to arrange transfer of funds and see Mr. Morrison at the Rocking Sea about the ranch operations." "Thank you, Your Honor," Rosalind managed, her voice barely above a whisper. As the judge dismissed the court, chaos erupted. Well-wishers pressed forward to congratulate Rosalind while Evelyn's faction huddled in angry conference. Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd to reach her. "Ma'am, the boys and I want you to know, we're ready to ride for you, Mr. Caldwell chose right." His weathered face split in a rare smile. "The Rocking Sea hasn't had a proper boss in months. Be good to have someone in charge who actually cares about the place." "Thank you, Jake," she said warmly. "I'll need all the help I can get." Marshal Briggs approached, his keen eyes taking in her obvious pregnancy and exhausted face. "Ma'am, my partner and I will escort you wherever you need to go. Make sure there's no trouble." "I appreciate that. Marshal, I need to visit the bank first. There's a mortgage to be paid." The crowd began to disperse, but Rosalind noticed how people looked at her differently now. Some with respect, some with envy, many with calculation. Yesterday she had been a poor widow. Today she was possibly the wealthiest woman in Wyoming territory. It was a transformation that left her feeling oddly displaced. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn waited with Richard and her entourage. The older woman's composure had returned. but her eyes burned with undiminished hatred. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she said softly as Rosalind passed. "This isn't over. That fortune is Caldwell money. It belongs with Caldwell blood. Benjamin's blood runs in the veins of every family he helped." Rosalind replied. "Every ranch hand he gave a second chance. Every struggling farmer he extended credit to. That's his true legacy. Not you." Richard stepped forward aggressively, but Marshal Briggs' hand moved to his sidearm, and the younger man backed down. "Move along, folks," the marshal said mildly. "Nothing more to see here." The ride to the bank was surreal. Rosalind, heavily pregnant and wearing her patched dress, escorted by federal marshals like some visiting dignitary. People stopped on the sidewalks to stare and whisper. At the Laramie Bank and Trust, Mr. Hollis, the bank president, personally rushed out to greet her. The same man who had sent cold foreclosure notices now fawned over her. "Mrs. Hayes, what an honor. Please, come into my office." "Can I get you tea? Something to eat? You must be exhausted after the trial." "Just the business at hand, Mr. Hollis," she said wearily. The next hour was a blur of papers and figures. Benjamin's Denver bank account alone held more money than she had imagined existed. The mortgage on her little farm, the debt that had haunted her nights, was paid with funds that represented a tiny fraction of her new wealth. "Will you be keeping the property?" Mr. Hollis asked. "Such a small holding compared to your other estates. Every inch of land has value when it's home," she replied, thinking of Thomas's grave there, of the dreams they had shared. By the time she emerged from the bank, word had spread throughout Laramie. A crowd had gathered, including several women who had snubbed her just days before. Rosalind, dear Mrs. Wellington, the mayor's wife, pushed forward. "We simply must have you for tea. The ladies' auxiliary would be honored. Another time, perhaps," Rosalind said, exhaustion weighing on every word. Jake Morrison had brought a comfortable carriage from the rocking sea, refusing to let her ride horseback in her condition. As she settled into the cushioned seats, she allowed herself a moment to close her eyes. "Where to, ma'am?" Jake asked. "The rocking sea. It's where Mr. Caldwell lived." "Tomorrow," she said. "Tonight. I need to go home. My home." The ride back to her cabin was quiet. The marshals rode alongside, alert for trouble, but the road was peaceful. As they crested the final hill, Rosalind saw her humble cabin and felt tears prick her eyes. It looked exactly the same, weathered, patched, modest, but everything had changed. "Ma'am," Marshal Briggs said as they stopped, "my partner and I will camp nearby tonight, just to be sure there's no trouble. Tomorrow we'll escort you to the rocking sea if you like." "Thank you, Marshal, I'm grateful." Inside the cabin, alone at last, Rosalind sank into her familiar chair and finally allowed the tears to come. Relief, exhaustion, grief for Benjamin, fear of the future. It all poured out as the sun set over the Wyoming prairie. She had won. Against all odds, justice had prevailed. But victory felt strange and hollow. She touched her belly, feeling the baby respond. "Your papa would have been proud," she whispered. "He always said right would win in the end. I wish he were here to see it." A knock at the door made her tense, but it was only Jake Morrison with a basket of food from the rocking sea kitchen. "Cookie insisted," he said gruffly. "Said you need proper meals now. For the baby." As she ate the first good meal she'd had in weeks, Rosalind thought about the future. She had wealth now. Unimaginable wealth, but also responsibility. Hundreds of employees, vast holdings, Benjamin's vision to uphold, and enemies. Evelyn wouldn't give up easily. The appeals, the schemes, the hatred, they would continue. But tonight, she had won. The pregnant widow who had given a dying man water now held his empire in her hands. It was a fairy tale ending that felt more like a beginning. Outside, the marshals kept watch. The stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. no longer a sound of loneliness, but of wild freedom. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Rosalind Hayes slept peacefully in her little cabin, no longer poor but forever changed, carrying both new life and new purpose beneath her heart. Justice had spoken. Now came the harder task of living up to its verdict. The first snowflakes of winter drifted past the window of Windmill Ranch as Rosalind cradled her daughter against her chest. Little Margaret, named for Benjamin's beloved wife, had arrived 3 weeks ago in the very bedroom where Benjamin Caldwell had once slept. Surrounded by the ranch doctor and several experienced midwives, the birth had been difficult, but both mother and child had emerged healthy and strong. "She has your eyes," Sarah Morrison, Jake's wife, said softly from the doorway. "But that determined chin, that's all her own." Rosalind smiled, adjusting the soft blanket around her daughter. "She'll need that determination. This world isn't always kind to women, even wealthy ones." 6 months had passed since the trial. Evelyn's appeals had been dismissed one by one, her influence no match for the clear evidence and federal oversight. The last Rosalind had heard. Evelyn and Richard had retreated to their estate in Denver, their threats finally silenced by legal defeats and the stern warning of federal judges. The rocking sea had become home, its grand house feeling less imposing with each passing day. Rosalind had kept her promise to Benjamin, maintaining fair wages for all hands, improving conditions for their families, even establishing a small school for the ranch children. The other properties in the Caldwell Empire were thriving under managers she had carefully chosen, men and women who understood that prosperity should be shared, not hoarded. "Mrs. Hayes?" Jake appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Sorry to disturb you, ma'am, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Rosalind frowned. Visitors were still treated with caution, even now. "Who is it?" "Young fellow from back east. Has a letter of introduction from a law firm in Philadelphia." Curious and wary in equal measure, Rosalind handed Margaret to Sarah and made her way to the study that had once been Benjamin's sanctuary. The man waiting there was indeed young, perhaps 25, with earnest brown eyes and clothes that marked him as a city dweller. "Mrs. Hayes." He stood quickly, nearly dropping his leather case. "My name is Charles Pemberton. I'm a lawyer with Pemberton and Associates in Philadelphia." Rosalind tensed. "Pemberton, are you related to—" "My uncle, yes," the young man said, his face flushing. "Clarence Pemberton, who represented Mrs. Whitmore. That's actually why I'm here. If this is another attempt to challenge the will—" "No," Charles said quickly. "No, quite the opposite. I need to tell you something. About my uncle. About what really happened." Rosalind studied him carefully, then gestured to a chair. "I'm listening." Charles sat, pulling documents from his case with nervous hands. "My uncle was more than Mrs. Whitmore's lawyer. He was involved in planning certain activities, the fire at your chicken coop, the hiring of those men to threaten you. I have proof." He spread papers on the desk, letters in his uncle's handwriting, bank records showing payments to known criminals, even a telegram discussing removing the obstacle, meaning Rosalind herself. "Why are you showing me this?" Rosalind asked, shocked by the evidence of conspiracy. "Because it's wrong." Charles said simply, "I became a lawyer to pursue justice, not pervert it. When I learned what my uncle had done, I couldn't stay silent. My family has disowned me for this. But some things matter more than family loyalty." Rosalind examined the documents carefully. They were damning, enough to destroy Clarence Pemberton's career and possibly send both him and Evelyn to prison. "What do you want in return?" she asked. Charles looked surprised. "Nothing. I wanted you to know the truth, and to apologize for my family's part in your suffering." For a long moment, Rosalind was silent, thinking of the fear-filled nights, the threats, the attempts to destroy her. Then she thought of Benjamin's words about responsibility, about using wealth wisely. "Mr. Pemberton," she said finally, "what are your plans now that your family has cast you out?" I'm not sure. I suppose I'll try to find work somewhere. Start over. Would you consider staying in Wyoming? I find myself in need of an honest lawyer, someone who understands that justice matters more than winning. His eyes widened. You'd trust me, after what my uncle did? I'd trust the man who sacrificed his family's position to do what was right? She corrected. Though you'd have to prove yourself. Of course, Jake Morrison doesn't suffer fools, and he'd be watching you closely. Yes, I'd be honored. And so the Caldwell Empire gained an unexpected ally, one whose inside knowledge of Eastern law would prove invaluable in the years to come. As Charles left to find lodgings in town, Rosalind returned to the nursery where Margaret slept peacefully. She gazed out the window at the vast Wyoming landscape, her landscape now, held in trust for this tiny girl and all who depended on the ranches for their livelihood. The journey from desperate widow to wealthy landowner had been impossible, improbable, like something from the storybooks she would one day read to Margaret, all because she had given a dying stranger a cup of water, following her grandmother's teaching that we must help those in need. Your papa would have loved you, she whispered to the sleeping baby. And Mr. Benjamin, I think he knew somehow, knew that saving us would save his legacy too. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jake entered, a rare smile on his weathered face. Thought you'd want to know, ma'am. Just got word from the Double Diamond. Best calving season in 10 years. And the families at the Triple Creek sent thanks for the new schoolhouse. He paused. Mr. Caldwell would be right proud. Thank you, Jake, for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you and the men. Respect works both ways. Ma'am, you've earned ours. He tipped his hat and left. As the sun set over Windmill Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rosalind rocked her daughter gently. The future stretched before them. Full of challenges, certainly. Running an empire was never simple, and there would always be those who resented a woman in power, but also full of possibility. She had kept her promises to Benjamin, to her unborn child, to herself. The wealth he had entrusted to her was being used as he had hoped, with wisdom and compassion. The ranch hands' children attended school. Struggling farmers found fair credit at reasonable terms. The Caldwell name, which might have become synonymous with greed under Evelyn's control, instead stood for opportunity and justice. We made it, little one, she murmured to Margaret. Against all odds, we made it. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside, warmed by the great fireplace and surrounded by people who had become family, Rosalind Hayes, widow, mother, unexpected heiress, and protector of an empire, finally felt at peace. The woman who had once counted pennies and feared eviction now counted thousands of acres and hundreds of lives depending on her. But at her core, she remained the same, a woman who understood that true wealth lay not in what you possessed, but in how you used it to help others. Benjamin Caldwell had known that. In his final hours, he had seen in a pregnant widow's simple act of kindness the heart that would honor his life's work. And in the years that followed, as Margaret grew strong and smart under the vast Wyoming skies, as the ranches prospered and the communities thrived, that kindness rippled outward like rings in a pool, proof that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change the world. For Rosalind Hayes, who gave a dying stranger water, it had changed everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these Wild West tales. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel to hear more stories of courage, love, and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Rosalind's journey? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you.